I feel like in writing, we should have authentic purposes, or if we're meeting outside expectations, to at least know why those are the expectations. And your reason for putting your paper in MLA could be because it's required for a particular course or assessment, and if you don't, you'll be marked down, and so you'll do that. And that's fine and everything, but I think it's important for learning when you're going to go out and use different styles or meet various expectations you might encounter in the future, to know why those are the expectations, what good are they, rather than just doing them because you were told to, right? I don't think that's good enough reason to expect someone to comply with something. So firstly, why do we cite in general? And you probably have some answers to that. And maybe this is the number one answer. It's related to the source itself, to give credit, right? There's intellectual property there. And if you don't cite, it's considered plagiarism or stealing their intellectual property, right? So, and there are copyright laws. It can become a legal matter if you're publishing someone else's work without giving due credit and using it in a way that's considered ethical in the field, in the context of your publication. So there's a reason to do it, to avoid legal penalties and to be fair and ethical with the source. But there are other reasons that we cite and why they're useful that are more reader audience related. So one of them, I mean, someone fact checking you and looking at the context to verify if you're using a source correctly. Those citations help them follow the trail to go find it. But as well, maybe a reader just wants to know more about a subject, or they're doing research, and you can use the same approach. You might find a source, and you kind of like the source, you're not getting too much use out of it, but they mention another source, and you're like, that's exactly what I need for my research. They may want access to your sources for their own purposes beyond reading your paper. So it gives them access to it. And it also rhetorically connects your conversation with the broader conversation going on. And if we go deeper with that, that's what lit reviews are all about. Where at the beginning of an academic article, they mention what everybody else said about what they're talking about, and then here's what I'm adding to that conversation. So you're recognizing and connecting what you're doing with the broader conversation going on, which is an important rhetorical move. And you can do that without a lit review just by your inclusion of sources. So, and then the specific parts of a works cited entry, why does all that stuff have to be in there? You know, a lot of times URLs are sufficient. Those can get broken in terms of finding a source, but it's also handy for your reader to know some of those things to very quickly evaluate the sources you use. So having credibility is not just using sources, but using credible sources, or that are credible or are at least useful in what you're doing with them in your paper. And so your reader might want to know a little bit about those sources in order to assess them. And they can go look at them and assess them themselves, but you also hand them some information as well. That extra publication information, etc., can be useful for finding a source in case the URL is no longer valid. So for example, the date. A date is really important. How recent some research is, like a study. If it's a very old study, or we need to maybe look at newer data to see if it's still the case, right? Whereas if it's a more recent study, we're like, oh yeah, that was done such and such a time. It's important to how we understand the data when it was collected, right? Because circumstances change over time. And then as well, interpretations change over time because of the different theories and approaches that we have in different time periods. Culturally, we change over time. So the date is really pretty significant. The perspective of the author at the time, more humanities, will change based on the circumstances. Someone who wrote about a particular topic in the 80s versus the 2000s is probably going to have a different perspective. We change culturally over time. That helps us understand the source. And those are things you take into account as an author, but your reader may want to take those into account as well. And you doing a good job with that, and your reader saying, yes, they're on top of things, and I feel I'm going to believe that you can garner trust that way. So, and then the publication, and either the type of publication or the specific publication would affect how your reader views that source, just like it affects how you view it. And the author too, there might be a recognized author, and you mentioning that author either in a signal phrase or at least it's somewhere in your works cited, then, or in parentheses. So then that affects how your reader, so that information actually affects how your reader reads your paper and looks at you as an author as well, depending on how you use the sources. So that information is useful not just to give credit to others, but to give your reader access in case they want to know more or fact check or look into context, or in terms of how they understand your source use and whether they affirm how you used it or not, depending on the publication information.